I never meant to see it. The moment that would shatter my daughter's world wasn't something I went looking for. It found me on a bitter January afternoon in Burlington, Vermont, when the temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero and the wind cut through my wool coat like it was made of tissue paper. There he was, my son-in-law, Thatcher Frost, sitting in the corner booth of the Maple Sugar Cafe, his fingers intertwined with those of a woman who was definitely not my daughter. The woman threw her head back in laughter, her sleek dark hair cascading down her back. Thatcher leaned forward, pressing his lips against hers in a kiss that lasted far too long to be innocent. My hands trembled as I clutched my shopping bags tighter, ducking behind a snow-covered hedge before they could spot me through the steamy cafe window. At 68, I had become invisible to most people, especially to Thatcher, who treated me like a relic, an inconvenient appendage to the family he'd married into. "Just smile and nod when Winnie starts rambling about her books," he'd once told Larkin, not realizing I was within earshot. "It's easier than trying to follow her scattered thoughts." My daughter had laughed uncomfortably, but hadn't defended me. After all, I was just her aging mother, the former literature professor whose opinions were now considered quaint and outdated. But being invisible has its advantages. People speak freely around you. They leave their phones unlocked. They forget you exist. The bitter wind slapped my face as I made my way back to my car, my mind racing faster than my heartbeat. This wasn't just about a kiss. This was about my daughter Larkin, who had sacrificed everything to build a life with Thatcher, who had invested her inheritance from her father into their joint medical technology company, who still looked at him with the same adoration she had on their wedding day 10 years ago. I'd never liked Thatcher. There was something calculated behind his charm, something cold in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Sterling, my late husband, had felt it too. "That man's ambition outweighs his integrity," he'd said shortly before the pancreatic cancer took him. We'd both hoped we were wrong. Now I knew we weren't. As I drove home through the swirling snow, my mind whirled with equal ferocity. I couldn't just blurt this out to Larkin. She'd never believe me without proof. Thatcher had spent years subtly undermining my credibility with her. My occasional forgetfulness became early dementia in his concerned whispers. My caution about their rapid business expansion became fear of change. My quiet observations became paranoia. My Victorian house on Maple Street welcomed me with creaking warmth as I stamped the snow from my boots in the entryway. The home Sterling and I had shared for 40 years now felt too big, too empty, but I'd refused to downsize despite Thatcher's persistent suggestions that I consider something more manageable. This house held my memories, my life story, and now it would become headquarters for my mission. That evening, I called the one person I knew would believe me without question, Bertie Quillwood, my best friend since our teaching days at the University of Vermont. Bertie had never trusted Thatcher either. "I've been waiting for that snake to show his true colors," she said, after I recounted what I'd seen. "But Winnie, you need more than just seeing them together. Larkin's wrapped her entire identity around that man and their company. She won't accept this without irrefutable evidence." She was right, of course. If I went to Larkin now, it would be my word against his, and Thatcher had made sure his word carried more weight. I needed proof, not just of the affair, but of anything else he might be hiding. Because men like Thatcher rarely limit their betrayals to just one arena. That night, I couldn't sleep. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. as I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Sterling. He'd been gone 6 years, but in moments like these, I could almost feel him beside me, his analytical mind working alongside mine. Sterling had always said that patterns tell stories. If Thatcher was betraying Larkin with another woman, what other betrayals might there be? The next morning, I drove to Larkin and Thatcher's office building downtown, arriving just before their weekly management meeting. I brought homemade cranberry muffins, playing the role of the doting mother-in-law that Thatcher expected. His smile tightened when he saw me in the lobby. "Winnie, what a surprise," he said, his voice pleasant but eyes cold. "Larkin's in a conference call right now." "Oh, I know, dear. I just thought the team might enjoy some breakfast before your meeting." I held up the basket of muffins. "Don't worry, I won't stay. I have my book club this morning." Relief crossed his face. "That's thoughtful of you." As he turned to lead me to the break room, I spotted her, the woman from the cafe. She was walking toward us, elegant in a tailored suit, her expression changing microscopically when she saw Thatcher with me. "Ah, Sable," Thatcher said smoothly. "This is my mother-in-law, Winslate Kavanaugh. Winnie, this is Sable Lockhart, our new Director of Strategic Partnerships." Sable extended her hand, perfectly manicured nails gleaming under the office lights. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Kavanaugh. Thatcher and Larkin speak of you often." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. I'd never heard my name mentioned in any of their office stories. I smiled warmly, playing my part as the oblivious elderly relative. "The pleasure's mine, dear. I've heard nothing about you, but that's to be expected. These two are so busy with their important work, they hardly have time for family chatter." I patted Thatcher's arm with affectionate condescension, noting how he subtly shifted away from my touch. As I left the building after depositing my muffins, I wasn't just angry, I was calculating. Sable Lockhart, Director of Strategic Partnerships. A position that hadn't existed 3 months ago when Larkin had shown me their company organizational chart. A position that would give someone intimate access to their client relationships, contract negotiations, and financial arrangements. That afternoon, I visited the public library and used their computers to search for information about Sable Lockhart. I discovered she'd worked at 3 different medical technology companies in the past 5 years, each stint lasting less than 18 months. Each company had experienced restructuring or strategic pivots shortly after her departure. It wasn't concrete evidence of wrongdoing, but it was a pattern that raised questions. I needed more. I needed access to information that wouldn't be available to the public, and for that, I needed help from someone with technical skills far beyond mine. Dashiell, my son, had inherited his father's analytical mind and had built a successful career in cybersecurity in Seattle. We spoke weekly, but I hadn't seen him in person since Sterling's funeral. Thatcher had made sure of that, scheduling important business events whenever Dash planned to visit, making pointed comments about how Dash had abandoned his family responsibilities by moving across the country. I called him that evening, careful to use my landline rather than my cell phone. "Mom, everything okay? It's not like you to call on a Tuesday." Dash's voice was warm but concerned. "I need your help, but I can't explain over the phone. Can you come to Burlington soon?" The silence on the other end told me he was weighing the urgency in my voice against his busy schedule. "I'll be there Friday evening," he finally said. "No questions until then?" "None. Just don't tell Larkin you're coming." 3 days later, Dashiell arrived at my doorstep, his tall frame hunched against the relentless Vermont cold. I hugged him fiercely, suddenly aware of how much I'd missed my son. Inside, with a fire crackling in the hearth and 2 glasses of Sterling's prized scotch between us, I told him everything. What I'd seen at the cafe, my suspicions about Sable, and the years of subtle undermining by Thatcher. Dash listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he stared into his glass for a long moment. "I've never trusted him," he finally said. But I stepped back because I thought that's what Larkin wanted. I thought she was happy. He looked up at me, determination hardening his features. "We need to protect her, but we need to do it right. If we move too soon with too little, he'll twist this against us. He'll make us look like the villains." That's exactly what I was thinking. "We need irrefutable proof." Dash nodded. "Let me handle the digital side. I can look into their company finances, see if there are any irregularities. But Mom," his voice grew gentle, "you need to be careful. If Thatcher realizes you suspect something, he'll make sure you never get close enough to gather evidence." "Don't worry about me," I said, sipping my scotch. "Being underestimated is my superpower now." Over the next 2 weeks, Dash worked remotely from my house while I played my role as the doting mother-in-law with renewed enthusiasm. I volunteered to help with preparations for Larkin and Thatcher's upcoming anniversary celebration, a lavish affair at the historic Snowfield Resort that Thatcher had insisted upon despite Larkin's preference for something more intimate. "It's not just a celebration of our marriage," he'd explained with practiced sincerity. "It's a networking opportunity for the company. We've invited all our major investors and partners, including, I discovered while reviewing the guest list under the guise of helping with seating arrangements, Sable Lockhart and representatives from a competing medical technology firm called Vertex Innovations. One evening, as snowflakes swirled outside the windows of my study, Dash called me in to show what he'd found on his laptop. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of financial transfers. "Thatcher has been moving small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, from the company's R&D fund into a shell account. From there, the money goes to an offshore account under the name Frost Ventures." "How much?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Just over $2 million over the past 18 months. I sank into the chair beside him. $2 million of the company's money, of Larkin's inheritance from Sterling, siphoned away by the man she trusted most. "There's more," Dash said grimly. "I found emails between Thatcher and Sable discussing the sale of proprietary information to Vertex Innovations. They're planning to jump ship after gutting Kavanaugh Frost Technologies from the inside." The betrayal was even worse than I'd imagined. Not just an affair, but a calculated scheme to steal from my daughter professionally as well as emotionally. They were planning to leave her with nothing. Not her husband, not her company, not even her professional reputation. "When?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "The emails suggest they're finalizing the deal at the anniversary party. Several Vertex executives will be there. It's the perfect cover, everyone focused on the celebration while they conduct their real business." I stood up, anger burning through my veins with more heat than I'd felt since Sterling's diagnosis. "Then that's where we'll expose them." Dash looked concerned. "Mom, we should take this to Larkin privately, let her process it before any public confrontation." I shook my head. "If we do that, Thatcher will twist the narrative. He'll say you fabricated the evidence out of jealousy or that I misunderstood what I saw because of my age. He'll persuade her to keep it quiet to protect the company, and then they'll complete their plan anyway." I looked at the snow battering against the window. "No, this needs to happen where there are witnesses, where he can't slither out of the truth." As the anniversary party approached, Dash and I refined our plan. We compiled the financial records, the emails, and photographs of Thatcher and Sable together that I'd managed to take during their not-so-discreet lunch meetings. Bertie helped us create multiple backup copies, stored in secure locations. The night before the party, Larkin came to my house alone. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, barely concealed by makeup. "Is everything all right, darling?" I asked, as I served her tea in Sterling's favorite porcelain cups. She sighed, turning the cup in her hands. "Thatcher's been working late every night this month. He says it's for this big deal we're closing, but—" She trailed off, staring into her tea. "But what?" I prompted gently. "He's different lately. Distant, secretive about his phone. When I ask questions about the company finances, he tells me not to worry my pretty head about it." She looked up at me, vulnerability shining in her eyes. "Am I being paranoid, Mom? Sterling always said I had good instincts for business, but Thatcher makes me feel like I'm being neurotic when I ask for details." My heart ached to tell her everything right then, to protect her from the pain that tomorrow would bring. But I knew that without the evidence in front of her, without witnesses to prevent Thatcher from twisting the truth, she might not believe the full extent of his betrayal. "Your father was right about your instincts," I said carefully, "and you're right to trust them now." She nodded, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing my mind. Thatcher keeps saying I'm too emotional to handle the business side of things." "Sterling didn't build that company by ignoring his gut feelings," I reminded her. "And he didn't leave it to you because he thought you were too emotional to run it." As she left that evening, hugging me tightly in the doorway, I almost broke my resolve. But the memory of Sterling's voice steadied me. "Truth hurts," he used to say, "but lies destroy." The night of the anniversary party arrived with a fresh blanket of snow across Burlington. The Snowfield Resort glittered with thousands of tiny lights, its grand ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland for the celebration. I arrived early, dressed in a midnight blue gown that Sterling had always loved, my silver hair arranged in an elegant updo that Bertie had helped me with. Thatcher seemed surprised by my appearance, used to seeing me in practical sweaters and slacks. "Winnie, you look different tonight," he said, his tone suggesting he wasn't sure it was appropriate for a woman my age to make such an effort. "A special occasion calls for special attire," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. 10 years of marriage is quite an achievement." His gaze slid past me to the entrance, where Sable had just arrived in a form-fitting red dress. I saw the flash of recognition between them, the silent communication of conspirators. As guests filled the ballroom, I watched Thatcher work the room, the perfect host, his hand resting possessively on Larkin's lower back as they greeted investors and colleagues. My daughter looked beautiful in her champagne-colored gown, but her smile seemed forced, her eyes following Thatcher whenever he moved away from her. Dashiell arrived last, handsome in his tailored suit, drawing surprised exclamations from guests who hadn't seen him in years. Larkin's face lit up at the sight of her brother, and she broke away from Thatcher to embrace Dash. "You didn't tell me he was coming," I heard Thatcher hiss at Larkin when she returned to his side. "I didn't know," she replied, her joy at seeing her brother dimming under her husband's displeasure. I moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, playing my part as the proud mother-in-law. All the while, I was acutely aware of Thatcher and Sable's careful choreography, never speaking directly to each other for too long, but always aware of each other's positions in the room. As dinner concluded and the orchestra began to play, I saw Thatcher check his watch and whisper something to Sable as they passed each other near the bar. She nodded subtly and then made her way toward a side door. 3 men in expensive suits, the Vertex executives, followed shortly after. It was time. I caught Dash's eye across the room and gave a slight nod. He moved to the technical booth where the evening's presentation was being controlled, while I approached the stage where Thatcher was preparing to give his anniversary speech. Larkin smiled at me as I joined them near the steps to the small platform. "Mom, would you like to say a few words after Thatcher? It would mean a lot to have you speak." Before I could answer, Thatcher cut in smoothly. "Darling, we've already planned the program carefully. We don't want to disrupt the flow with impromptu additions." He gave me an apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure everyone would rather move on to dancing than listen to speeches all night." Larkin's face fell slightly, but she nodded in acquiescence, always deferring to him, always doubting herself. "Not tonight." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, "I think your guests might be interested in what I have to say." I turned to Larkin. "And I believe you need to hear it most of all." Confusion crossed her face, but before Thatcher could intervene, the MC announced him to the stage. With one last warning glance at me, he ascended the steps and took his place at the microphone. 10 years ago, I married the most beautiful, intelligent woman I've ever known," he began, his voice warm with practiced sincerity. "Larkin has been not just my wife, but my partner in every sense of the word." As he continued his speech, I felt Dash come up beside me. "The side room," he whispered. "That's where they're finalizing the deal. I've got the camera feed on the presentation system, ready to switch when you give the signal." I squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, my eyes never leaving Thatcher as he wove his tale of devoted partnership and shared dreams. The irony of his words burned in my chest, fueling my resolve. "And as we look to the future," Thatcher was saying, raising his champagne glass, "I want to thank everyone in this room for being part of our journey to the next 10 years of love, success, and growth." The crowd applauded as he took a sip, his eyes scanning the room for Sable, a flicker of concern crossing his face when he didn't spot her. It was my moment. I moved forward, climbing the steps to the stage before anyone could stop me. Thatcher's smile froze as I approached the microphone. "I'd like to add my own toast," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me, the elderly mother-in-law who had never before commanded such attention at company events. "To truth," I said, raising my own glass, "because without it, love is merely illusion, and partnerships built on lies inevitably crumble." I turned to face my son-in-law directly. "Isn't that right, Thatcher?" The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. In the stillness, I gave Dash the signal, a subtle tap of my finger against my glass. The large projection screen behind us, which had been showing tasteful photos of Larkin and Thatcher throughout their marriage, suddenly switched to a live feed of the side room, where Sable Lockhart was shaking hands with the Vertex executives, a stack of documents and a flash drive on the table between them. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Larkin stepped forward, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "What is this?" she demanded, looking from the screen to Thatcher. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The clock was ticking, and it was time for Thatcher Frost to face the winter storm he'd created. The stunned silence in the ballroom lasted only seconds before erupting into a chaos of whispers and gasps. I stood firm at the microphone, my gaze locked on Thatcher's face as the color drained from it. His eyes darted between the screen showing Sable with the Vertex executives and Larkin, whose expression had transformed from confusion to dawning horror. "What is this?" Larkin repeated, her voice stronger now, edged with anger. She moved toward the stage, her champagne dress shimmering under the crystal chandeliers as she climbed the steps. Thatcher recovered quickly, plastering on the smooth, reassuring smile I'd watched him perfect over a decade of manipulating my daughter. "Larkin, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. Sable is finalizing the distribution agreement we discussed last week." But Larkin wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the screen where Dash had now switched from the live feed to a series of emails between Thatcher and Sable. Emails discussing not just their affair, but their plan to sell Kavanaugh Frost Technologies' proprietary medical device designs to Vertex Innovations. "Once the transfer is complete, we'll have enough leverage to force a sale," Larkin read aloud from one of the projected emails, her voice shaking. "Larkin won't have a choice but to accept the terms. She'll be too devastated by everything else to fight back." She turned to Thatcher, her face pale but composed. "Everything else? What everything else would devastate me, Thatcher?" The room had gone silent again, the guests frozen in place, witnessing the unraveling of a marriage and potentially a company in real time. Several investors were already on their phones, no doubt calling their financial advisors. Thatcher stepped forward, reaching for Larkin's arm. "This is not the place for this discussion. Your mother and brother have clearly misinterpreted some business communications. We can explain everything privately." Larkin pulled away from his grasp. "Answer the question. What else should I be devastated about?" I moved beside my daughter, supporting her with my presence, but letting her take control of the confrontation. This was her marriage, her company, her moment of reckoning. My role now was to ensure Thatcher couldn't twist the truth. "Perhaps Mrs. Lockhart could join us and help clear things up," I suggested, my voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "She seems to be an integral part of whatever business you're conducting tonight." Dash, who had positioned himself near the side door, opened it to reveal Sable Lockhart frozen in the doorway, her red dress a splash of blood against the winter-white decor. Behind her, the Vertex executives were hurriedly gathering papers, clearly trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. "Ms. Lockhart," I called out, "would you care to explain to my daughter what you and her husband have been planning? Or perhaps you'd prefer I share the photographs?" Dash tapped a key on his laptop, and the screen changed to show Thatcher and Sable in an intimate embrace outside her apartment building, dated just 3 days earlier. The image was followed by another of them entering a hotel together, and another of a passionate kiss in Thatcher's car. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Larkin made a small, wounded sound beside me, but when I looked at her, I saw not just pain, but rage building in her eyes. 10 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible in the hushed room. 10 years of my life, my father's company, our future. She turned to face the crowd, addressing them directly. "I apologize that you've all become witnesses to this revelation, but perhaps it's fitting. My husband wanted an audience tonight after all." Thatcher moved toward her, desperation replacing his usual calculated charm. "Larkin, you're overreacting. These images are taken out of context. Your mother has always resented me, and now she's manipulated your brother into helping her drive a wedge between us." "Stop!" Larkin's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "You don't get to rewrite this. Not anymore." She turned to Dash. "Show them the financial records." Dash nodded and brought up a series of spreadsheets and bank transfers on the screen. To most of the guests, it probably looked like incomprehensible financial data. But to the investors and business partners in the room, the implications were clear. One of the company's board members, a silver-haired man named Gregory Parnell, stepped forward for a closer look. "These appear to show systematic embezzlement," he said gravely, adjusting his glasses. "If these records are accurate, over $2 million has been diverted from the company's research and development fund into private accounts. Thatcher's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. I've built this company from nothing. Without me, Kavanaugh Frost would still be a small local operation instead of a national leader in medical technology. Without you? I couldn't contain myself any longer. My husband founded that company. My daughter expanded it with her innovation and hard work. You married into success, Thatcher. You didn't create it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further as Larkin stepped closer to her husband, close enough that only those of us on the stage could hear her next words. Was any of it real? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Or was I just a convenient path to my father's company? Something flickered across Thatcher's face, perhaps a moment of genuine regret, before the mask of indignation returned. This is ridiculous. I won't stand here and be ambushed at my own anniversary celebration. He turned to the crowd, attempting to regain control. I apologize for this unfortunate family drama. Clearly, my mother-in-law has chosen to air her personal grievances in a highly inappropriate manner. But his words fell flat. The evidence was too damning, the betrayal too clear. Several guests were already quietly leaving, while others watched with undisguised fascination. The Vertex executives had disappeared entirely. Sable, however, remained frozen in the doorway, her calculated poise finally faltering as she realized the full extent of what had been revealed. When she spoke, her words were directed at Thatcher, not Larkin. You promised this would go smoothly, she hissed. You said no one would question the transfer if we timed it with the anniversary party. It was the final confirmation, if any was still needed. Thatcher's face contorted with fury as he realized Sable had just confirmed their conspiracy in front of dozens of witnesses. Larkin's composure finally broke. She turned away from Thatcher, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I moved to comfort her, but before I could reach her, she straightened her spine and wiped her eyes with deliberate control. Security, she called, her voice surprisingly strong. Two men in dark suits who had been stationed near the doors stepped forward. Please escort Mr. Frost and Ms. Lockhart from the premises and ensure they don't leave with any company property. Thatcher's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't do this. I'm the CEO. This is my company too. Actually, Gregory Parnell interjected, as legal counsel for the board, I can confirm that if these financial records are verified, we have grounds to immediately suspend you pending investigation. He nodded to the security personnel. I support Mrs. Frost's request. It's Kavanaugh, Larkin corrected him, removing her wedding ring and placing it on the podium with a soft but definitive click. Larkin Kavanaugh. As security moved toward Thatcher and Sable, the orchestra began playing again, a misguided attempt by the conductor to restore normalcy to the shattered evening. The incongruity of the cheerful waltz against the backdrop of destruction struck me as almost comical. Thatcher shook off the security guard who attempted to take his arm. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening as he glared at me. You had no right to interfere in our marriage. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Larkin, always trying to turn her against me. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Thatcher. I simply made sure she saw the truth before you took everything from her. He turned to Larkin, making one last attempt. 10 years, Larkin. Are you really going to throw that away because your mother and brother showed you some doctored emails and photos? We can work through this. We've built too much together to let it end like this. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Larkin's face, the ingrained habit of trusting this man who had spent a decade molding her perceptions. I held my breath, fighting the urge to intervene again. But then, Dashiell stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his sister's shoulder. The files aren't doctored, Thatcher. The bank records are real. The emails are real. The photos are real. It's all been verified and backed up in multiple secure locations. He paused, his expression hardening. And the authorities have already been notified about the financial fraud. At the mention of authorities, several more guests hastily departed. Thatcher's face went from angry red to ashen gray. You're making a terrible mistake, he said to Larkin, but the fight had gone out of his voice. He knew he was cornered. No, she replied quietly. I made the mistake 10 years ago. I'm correcting it now. As security finally escorted Thatcher and Sable from the ballroom, an unnatural quiet settled over the remaining guests. The orchestra had stopped playing again, the musicians looking uncomfortably at each other, unsure whether to continue. Larkin turned to face the crowd, her composure remarkable given what had just transpired. "I apologize that your evening has been disrupted in this way. Please feel free to stay and enjoy the refreshments or depart if you prefer. Either way, I thank you for your presence tonight." She paused, then added with unexpected steadiness, "This was meant to be a celebration of a partnership. Instead, it has become a moment of truth and new beginnings. I hope you'll all support Kavanaugh Technologies as we move forward from this difficult moment." With those words, she stepped down from the stage and walked steadily through the parting crowd toward the exit. I followed her, worried about what would happen when the public face she'd maintained so admirably finally crumbled in private. Dash remained behind briefly to secure his laptop and the evidence, speaking quietly with Gregory Parnell and 2 other board members who had approached him with urgent questions. I caught up with Larkin in the resort's opulent lobby, where she stood alone by a massive stone fireplace, staring into the flames. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the world into a blank white canvas. "Larkin," I said softly, reaching for her hand. She turned to me, her eyes dry but vacant with shock. "Did you know? Before tonight?" I nodded, seeing no point in anything but complete honesty now. "I saw them together 2 weeks ago. Dash helped me gather the evidence. We wanted to be certain before we told you." "Why like this?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Why not come to me privately?" "Would you have believed us?" I asked gently. "Thatcher has spent years undermining my credibility with you, making you doubt your own judgment. We needed witnesses. We needed him to be unable to deny or explain away what he'd done." She was silent for a long moment, and I feared I'd made a terrible mistake in how I'd handled the revelation. But then she squeezed my hand. "You're right," she whispered. "I wouldn't have believed it, not without seeing it myself. He would have convinced me it was all a misunderstanding, that you were confused or jealous or losing your mental acuity." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He's been suggesting you might need memory care for the past year. Now I understand why." Anger flared in me at this new revelation, but I tamped it down. This night wasn't about my feelings. "What happens now?" I asked, as Dash joined us by the fireplace. Larkin straightened her shoulders, something of her father's determination flickering in her eyes. "Now we save the company. We contact all our investors and partners to reassure them. We conduct a full financial audit. We change the locks on the offices and secure all the research data." She looked at her brother. "Can you stay for a while? I could use your expertise." Dash nodded without hesitation. "As long as you need me." "And then?" I asked, seeing the strategic business mind Sterling had nurtured in our daughter reasserting itself, but wondering about the woman beneath. Larkin's composure wavered for the first time. "I don't know, Mom. Everything I thought I knew about my life for the past decade was a lie. I need to figure out who I am without him." I wrapped my arm around her waist, and she leaned into me slightly, accepting my support. "You're Larkin Kavanaugh. You're your father's daughter. You're stronger than you know." She nodded, wiping away the first tear she'd allowed herself since the revelation. "Let's go home. Not to—" She stopped, realizing she couldn't face the house she'd shared with Thatcher. "Can I stay with you tonight?" "Of course," I said, my heart aching for her pain even as relief washed through me that she was free of Thatcher's influence at last. "Your room is always waiting for you." As we stepped outside into the swirling snow, I was struck by how the world could appear so unchanged when everything had been irrevocably altered. The valet brought around my car, and the 3 of us drove in silence through Burlington's empty streets, the only sound the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers pushing away the falling snow. By the time we reached my Victorian home on Maple Street, Larkin had fallen into an exhausted sleep in the back seat, the emotional toll of the evening finally overwhelming her. Dash carried his sister inside, laying her gently on the sofa in the living room while I built up the fire and covered her with the quilt Sterling's mother had made for our wedding. "You did the right thing," Dash said quietly as we moved to the kitchen to make tea. "It was brutal, but necessary." I nodded, filling the kettle with unsteady hands. I keep telling myself that, but seeing her pain. I trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Thatcher would have left her with nothing," Dash reminded me. The company, her self-respect, her financial security. He would have taken it all. And he nearly succeeded. The kettle whistled, and I poured hot water over the tea bags, the familiar ritual grounding me in the midst of the night's upheaval. I know, but I can't help wondering if there could have been a gentler way. There's no gentle way to discover your husband is a con artist who married you for your company and planned to leave you destitute, Dash said bluntly. At least this way, she has witnesses to his betrayal, legal grounds to protect the company, and no opportunity for him to gaslight her into doubting what happened. I handed him a mug of tea, acknowledging the truth in his words. When did you get so wise? A sad smile crossed his face. I had good teachers. You and Dad both. We sipped our tea in companionable silence, listening to the occasional crack and pop from the fireplace in the next room. Despite the devastating evening, there was something healing about having both my children under my roof again. Something that felt right, even in the midst of all that had gone so terribly wrong. Around midnight, Larkin stirred and joined us in the kitchen, her makeup smudged, her elegant updo falling in disarray around her shoulders. She looked younger, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I can't believe he never loved me, she said without preamble, sitting down heavily at the kitchen table. 10 years, and it was all about the company, about my father's legacy. You don't know that for certain, I said gently, though in my heart I believed it was true. People are complicated. He might have loved you in his way, even while betraying you. She shook her head. I saw his face tonight, Mom, when he was caught. There wasn't a shred of remorse for hurting me, only anger at being exposed. She stared into the mug of tea I placed before her. I've been such a fool. No, Dash said firmly. You've been a trusting person who believed in your marriage. That's not foolishness. It's humanity. Larkin looked up at her brother, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. When did you get so wise? I bit back a smile at the echo of my own question. Perhaps wisdom ran in the Kavanaugh blood after all. How did you know? Larkin asked me suddenly. What made you suspicious enough to start investigating? I hesitated, not wanting to add to her pain, but knowing she deserved the full truth. I saw them together at the Maple Sugar Cafe. They didn't see me. They were intimate. She nodded slowly, absorbing this new wound. And the financial fraud? How did you uncover that? That was my contribution, Dash admitted. Once Mom told me about the affair, I started looking into the company finances. The patterns were there if you knew what to look for. Thatcher was careful, but not careful enough. I never would have found it, Larkin said, a fresh wave of shame washing over her face. He handled all the financial oversight. He convinced me I wasn't good with numbers, that I should focus on the creative and research sides of the business. Anger flashed through me at this new revelation of Thatcher's manipulation. Sterling had raised our daughter to be confident in all aspects of business management, but Thatcher had systematically undermined that confidence. That wasn't an accident, I pointed out. He needed to keep you away from the financial records. It was strategic. Larkin's expression hardened. Everything he did was strategic, wasn't it? Even marrying me in the first place. She stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen floor. God, I feel so violated. Like the past decade of my life was just fiction. A story he was writing with me as an unwitting character. Neither Dash nor I had any words of comfort to offer because she was right. Thatcher had orchestrated their entire relationship with calculated precision. I want to destroy him, Larkin said suddenly, her voice low and intense. Not just legally. I want him to feel what I'm feeling right now. I want him to lose everything he values. The vehemence in her tone surprised me. My daughter had always been the peacemaker, the one who sought compromise and understanding. But then, she had never before been betrayed so completely. He will face consequences, Dash assured her. The financial fraud alone carries serious penalties, and we've secured enough evidence to ensure the divorce proceedings won't favor him. It's not enough, Larkin insisted. He's slippery. He has connections. He'll find a way to land on his feet, to spin this into some new opportunity. She looked at me, a fierce determination in her eyes that reminded me painfully of Sterling. I need to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. I need to make sure the whole world knows exactly who Thatcher Frost really is. I should have counseled restraint. I should have advised her to focus on healing rather than revenge. That would have been the wiser, more mature response. But looking at my daughter, seeing the shattered remains of her trust and the decade of manipulation she had endured, I found myself nodding in agreement. "Then we'll make sure they know," I said simply. As the night deepened around us, the three of us began to form a plan, not just to protect Kavanaugh Technologies and secure Larkin's financial future, but to ensure that Thatcher Frost would never again be able to charm his way into another woman's life and company. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying Burlington under a pristine white blanket that concealed all the messiness beneath. By morning, the world would look clean and new. But we knew better. We knew that beneath the surface, everything had changed irrevocably. And for Thatcher Frost, the real storm was just beginning. The morning after the anniversary party dawned bright and cruel, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow with blinding intensity. I found Larkin already awake in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at her phone with hollow eyes. She had changed into an old University of Vermont sweatshirt and leggings I kept in her childhood bedroom, her elegant anniversary dress draped lifelessly over a chair. 27 missed calls from Thatcher, she said without looking up. 16 voicemails, 43 text messages. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion. He's swinging between threatening legal action and begging for forgiveness. I set about making breakfast, the familiar routine of cracking eggs and toasting bread, offering a semblance of normalcy in a world that had been upended. "Have you listened to any of the messages?" She shook her head. I can't bear to hear his voice yet. She set the phone screen down on the table with deliberate finality. "The board has called an emergency meeting for noon today. Gregory Parnell says they're prepared to remove Thatcher officially, but they want my assurance that I can stabilize the company." The implicit question hung in the air between us. Could she? After a decade of being gradually undermined and pushed away from the financial operations of her own company, did she have the confidence and knowledge to take full control? "You can," I said firmly, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "Your father built that company because he saw a need for more affordable medical technology. You expanded it because you inherited not just his business acumen, but his compassion. That's something Thatcher never understood or valued." Larkin pushed the eggs around her plate without eating. "He's telling people I had a mental breakdown, that I've been unstable for months, and that you and Dash took advantage of my fragility to turn me against him." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He's already controlling the narrative, just like he's controlled everything else." From the doorway, Dash cleared his throat. He was already dressed, his laptop under his arm. "Not for long. I've been monitoring the situation online. Several business publications have already picked up the story of financial impropriety at Kavanaugh Frost Technologies. The business community is rallying around you, Larkin. No one's buying Thatcher's version." Some of the tension eased from Larkin's shoulders. "Really?" Dash nodded, setting his laptop on the table and turning it to show her a business news site. "Gregory Parnell gave a statement this morning, supporting you and confirming the board's intention to conduct a full financial audit. 3 of your biggest investors have publicly reaffirmed their confidence in Kavanaugh Technologies. Note the dropped Frost already, under your leadership." I watched a spark of her old confidence return to Larkin's eyes as she read the article. Sterling would have been proud of how our children were supporting each other, of how Dash had unhesitatingly put his own life in Seattle on hold to help his sister through this crisis. "We should get moving if we're going to make that board meeting," I said, glancing at the clock. "I'll drive you." Larkin looked up in surprise. "You want to come?" "If you'll have me," I replied carefully. "I thought you might want moral support, but I understand if you'd prefer to handle this on your own." She hesitated, and I saw her wrestling with conflicting instincts. The independence she'd always valued versus the recognition that she didn't have to face this alone. "I'd like you both there," she finally said, "but not just for support. Mom, you knew the company when Dad first built it. You understand its original mission better than anyone. And Dash, we'll need your technical expertise to explain exactly what Thatcher was doing with the finances." She straightened her shoulders. "We're going to rebuild Kavanaugh Technologies together, as a family, the way it always should have been." For the first time since the devastating revelation, I felt a glimmer of hope that something positive might emerge from the wreckage of Thatcher's betrayal. The board meeting was held in the company's main conference room, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Burlington's snow-covered downtown. As we walked through the office to reach it, employees stopped their work to stare. News of the anniversary party's dramatic conclusion had clearly spread, but the details remained murky for most staff members. In the conference room, the tension was palpable. 8 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to outright anger. Gregory Parnell rose to greet us, his handshake firm and reassuring. "Larkin, we're all deeply disturbed by what's come to light," he said gravely. "I want to assure you that the board stands unanimously behind you during this difficult transition." Thatcher's chair at the head of the table was conspicuously empty. I noted with satisfaction that his nameplate had already been removed. "Is he coming?" Larkin asked, nodding toward the empty seat. "We've instructed him not to enter the premises until the financial investigation is complete," Gregory replied. "Security has been informed. He's been placed on administrative leave, pending formal termination." Larkin nodded, her expression neutral as she took a seat, not in her usual place beside Thatcher's chair, but at the opposite end of the table. Dash and I sat on either side of her, a united front. "Before we begin," she said, her voice steady and professional despite the emotional turmoil I knew she was experiencing, "I want to thank all of you for your support. What happened last night was profoundly personal for me, but I recognize that it also has significant implications for this company, its employees, and its investors. I intend to address both aspects with the seriousness they deserve." The board members nodded, respect evident in their expressions. Larkin had always been well-liked and respected within the company, her warmth and integrity a counterbalance to Thatcher's more cutthroat approach. Now, watching her take command of the room, I saw a new dimension to my daughter, a steely resolve that reminded me painfully of Sterling in his prime. "Let's start with the facts," she continued, nodding to Dash. "My brother has uncovered evidence of significant financial misconduct. I believe you should all understand exactly what has been happening under our noses." Dash opened his laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. For the next 30 minutes, he methodically walked the board through the evidence we had gathered: the diverted funds, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, and finally, the planned sale of proprietary technology to Vertex Innovations. The total amount misappropriated appears to be approximately $2.3 million over the past 18 months, Dash concluded, his tone clinical despite the shocking nature of what he was describing. Additionally, the attempted sale of proprietary research would have devalued the company by an estimated $15–20 million in lost future revenue. The room erupted in outraged murmurs. One board member, a silver-haired woman named Victoria Chambers, who had been one of Sterling's earliest investors, slammed her hand on the table. "This is unconscionable," she declared. "Have the authorities been notified?" "Yes," Larkin confirmed. "The FBI has been provided with all the evidence. They've opened an investigation into wire fraud and corporate espionage." Another board member, a younger man whose name I couldn't recall, looked troubled. "The publicity from this could be devastating. Have you considered handling this more discreetly, for the sake of the company's reputation?" I felt Larkin stiffen beside me and resisted the urge to jump to her defense. This was her moment to establish her leadership. "No," she said firmly. "Discretion would only serve Thatcher, not Kavanaugh Technologies. Our company was founded on principles of integrity and transparency. I won't compromise those values to protect the man who betrayed them." She leaned forward, meeting each board member's gaze in turn. "Furthermore, I believe our investors, partners, and customers will respect our commitment to accountability. We didn't create this situation, but we will handle it honestly." Victoria Chambers nodded approvingly. "Well said. Sterling would be proud." The meeting continued for another 2 hours as they discussed immediate steps to stabilize the company. Larkin appointed an interim CFO, approved a full external audit, and outlined a communication strategy for employees, investors, and the media. Throughout it all, she displayed a command of the business that clearly surprised some board members who had grown accustomed to Thatcher's insistence that she wasn't interested in the financial side of operations. By the time we left the building, the winter sun was already beginning to set, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Larkin walked between Dash and me, her spine straight despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "You were magnificent in there," I told her as we reached the car. She gave me a tired smile. I didn't feel magnificent. I felt like I was playing a role, pretending to be in control when everything inside me is still in chaos. "That's leadership," Dash said simply. "Acting with certainty even when you don't feel it." In the car, Larkin's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering on speakerphone. "Mrs. Frost?" a woman's voice asked. "Miss Kavanaugh," Larkin corrected firmly. "Of course I apologize. This is Janelle Morris from the Burlington Daily. We're running a story on the situation at Kavanaugh Technologies, and we'd like to get your comment on allegations made by Thatcher Frost that the evidence against him was fabricated as part of a family vendetta." I watched Larkin's knuckles whiten as she gripped the phone. "Mr. Frost's claims are false and desperate. The evidence of financial misconduct has been verified by independent experts and turned over to federal authorities. The board of directors has reviewed this evidence and taken appropriate action. That's all I have to say at this time." She ended the call before the reporter could ask another question. "It's starting," she said grimly. "The media circus, Thatcher's counter-narrative. He won't go down without dragging everyone else with him." "Let him try," I said, surprised by the fierceness in my own voice. "The truth is on our side." But we all knew that truth wasn't always enough in the court of public opinion. Thatcher was charming, persuasive, and utterly without scruples. He would use every tool at his disposal to discredit Larkin and salvage his reputation. Back at my house, we found a news van parked at the curb and a reporter waiting on the porch. Dash handled them with polite but firm dismissal, while Larkin and I slipped in through the back door. Inside, the answering machine was blinking with a dozen messages. "I need to get my own place," Larkin said wearily as she sank onto the sofa. "I can't keep hiding here forever, and I certainly can't go back to the house." The house she had shared with Thatcher was a modernist showcase in Burlington's most exclusive neighborhood, all glass and steel and carefully curated minimalism. It had never seemed like Larkin to me. Too cold, too impersonal, too much a reflection of Thatcher's aesthetic rather than my daughter's warmer sensibilities. "You can stay here as long as you need," I assured her. "But when you're ready, we'll find you somewhere that's truly yours." As evening settled around us, Dash ordered takeout from Larkin's favorite Thai restaurant, and we ate in the kitchen, deliberately avoiding the news and the continuing fallout from the previous night's revelations. For a few hours, it almost felt like old times. My children at the table, sharing stories and gentle teasing, the weight of adult responsibilities temporarily set aside. But reality intruded when Larkin's phone chimed with an email notification. She read it in silence, her expression darkening. "Thatcher's attorney has sent a cease and desist letter," she said, passing the phone to Dash. "They're claiming defamation, wrongful termination, and theft of intellectual property. They're demanding the return of all personal data we illegally obtained from his devices." Dash scanned the email, his expression unimpressed. "Standard intimidation tactics. Nothing of substance here. They're also freezing our joint accounts and claiming half of my shares in the company as marital property," Larkin continued, her voice tight with renewed anger. "He's trying to maintain control even now." "We expected this," I reminded her gently. "Gregory has already connected you with the best divorce attorney in Vermont. This is just the opening move in a game Thatcher won't win." Larkin nodded, but I could see the toll each new development was taking on her. The initial shock and righteous anger were beginning to give way to grief. Grief for the marriage she'd believed in, the partnership she'd trusted, the decade of her life invested in a relationship built on lies. "I think I need some air," she said suddenly, rising from the table. "I'm going for a walk." "It's freezing out there," I protested, "and dark." She was already pulling on her coat. "I'll stay on the main streets. I need to move, to think, to be alone for a little while." Dash and I exchanged concerned glances, but didn't try to stop her. Larkin had always processed difficult emotions through movement, ever since she was a child. "Take your phone," Dash said, handing it to her, "and call if you need us." After she left, Dash helped me clean up the dinner dishes in companionable silence. Finally, he spoke what we were both thinking. "She's going to be okay, isn't she?" I rinsed a plate, considering the question seriously. Eventually, yes. Larkin has always had inner strength, even when she doesn't recognize it herself. But this kind of betrayal, it changes a person. For better or worse? Dash asked, leaning against the counter. I thought about Sterling, about how his own betrayal by a business partner early in his career had made him simultaneously more cautious and more determined. Both, probably. She'll be warier, less trusting, but also more self-reliant, more aware of her own capabilities. Dash nodded, his expression thoughtful. And what about you, Mom? How are you handling all this? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on Larkin's pain that I hadn't fully processed my own emotions about the situation. I'm angry, I admitted after a moment, furious that he used her, that he tried to steal Sterling's legacy, that he made her doubt herself for so long. I dried my hands on a dish towel, turning to face my son. But I'm also relieved. I've watched Thatcher diminish your sister for years, so subtly that she didn't even notice it happening. Now she has a chance to rediscover who she really is. Dash studied me with the perceptive gaze he'd inherited from his father. And you? Do you feel vindicated? That would be petty, I deflected. It would be human, he countered. I sighed, acknowledging the truth in his words. Yes, there's some vindication in finally having everyone see what I've suspected about Thatcher all along. But I would trade all of that in an instant if it meant sparing Larkin this pain. Our conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. Through the front window, I could see another news van had arrived, its lights illuminating the snow-covered yard with harsh white glare. I'll handle it, Dash said, moving toward the door. But before he could reach it, the door burst open, and Larkin stumbled in, her face flushed from the cold and something else, a wild energy that reminded me of Sterling in his most determined moments. He's at the house, she said breathlessly. Thatcher. I saw the lights on when I was walking past. He's packing things up. There are boxes everywhere. I think he's taking everything valuable. Dash was immediately alert. Did he see you? She shook her head. I stayed across the street. But we need to stop him. Those aren't just his things. They're my family heirlooms, my father's possessions, my... She broke off, her voice cracking. He's stealing my life piece by piece, and I'm hiding in my mother's house like a frightened child. I recognized the dangerous glint in her eye, the same look Sterling got just before making a bold and sometimes reckless decision. Larkin, don't. Let the lawyers handle this. Going over there now will only lead to a confrontation that won't help anyone. But she was already shaking her head, her decision made. No, Mom. I've let him take control of too many aspects of my life for too long. I won't let him take my home and my belongings too. She turned to Dash. Will you come with me? Not to confront him, just as a witness, so he can't twist what happens. Dash hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to protect his sister and respecting her need to reclaim her agency. Okay, he finally agreed. But we're calling the police first, and we're not going inside if he's there. We just document what he's taking. Evidence for the divorce proceedings. Larkin nodded, her momentary fire banking into something more controlled, but no less determined. That's fair. I'm coming too, I said, already reaching for my coat. When both my children looked at me in surprise, I added, 3 witnesses are better than 2, and it's my family's legacy he's pillaging as well. 20 minutes later, our car parked discreetly down the street from Larkin and Thatcher's modernist house. We watched as Thatcher and another man loaded boxes into an expensive SUV. Even from a distance, I could make out the distinctive shape of Sterling's antique chess set being carelessly shoved into the vehicle. Larkin's breathing quickened beside me. That's my father's chess set, the one he taught me to play on. Thatcher never even liked chess. From the back seat, Dash quietly documented the theft with his phone camera, the police dispatcher on speakerphone confirming that officers were en route. 5 minutes out, the dispatcher reported. Please remain in your vehicle until they arrive. But as we watched, Thatcher and his companion finished loading the SUV and prepared to leave. In another moment, they would be gone with Sterling's chess set, and who knew what other irreplaceable family treasures. I can't let him take it, Larkin said suddenly, her hand on the door handle. Larkin, wait, I began, but she was already out of the car, striding purposefully through the snow toward the driveway where Thatcher was closing the SUV's rear hatch. Dash and I scrambled after her, fear for her safety outweighing our concerns about confrontation. By the time we caught up, Larkin was standing directly in front of Thatcher, her voice carrying clearly in the cold night air. "Put my father's chess set back," she demanded, her tone eerily calm despite the fury evident in her rigid posture. Thatcher's surprise at seeing her quickly transformed into his familiar condescending smile. "Larkin, darling, I was wondering where you'd run off to." He glanced past her to where Dash and I stood several paces back. "I see you've brought reinforcements. How dramatic. The chess set, Thatcher, and whatever else you've taken that isn't yours." He sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "Everything I'm taking is mine by right. We're still married in case you've forgotten. What's yours is mine." "We both know that's not how it works," Larkin countered, "especially not when you've committed fraud and are under federal investigation. The police are on their way. I suggest you put back anything that belonged to my family before they arrive." Something ugly flashed across Thatcher's handsome face. "Your family? You mean the family that undermined me at every turn? Your pathetic mother who could never accept that you chose me over her? Your absentee brother who suddenly reappears to play hero?" He stepped closer to Larkin, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "Or do you mean your precious father, whose shadow you've never managed to step out from?" I saw Larkin flinch at the mention of Sterling, but she held her ground. "You never understood, did you? You thought it was about the company, about the money. But it was never that. It was about integrity, about building something that helps people. That's what my father taught me. That's what you tried to destroy." Thatcher laughed, the sound brittle in the frigid air. "Such nobility. Tell me, did your father's integrity keep the company profitable? Did it expand operations into 3 new states? Did it secure the Meridian contract that doubled your revenue last year?" His expression hardened. "No, I did those things. While you were playing the compassionate face of the company, I was making the hard decisions that kept it growing." "By stealing?" Dash interjected, stepping forward to stand beside his sister. "By selling proprietary technology to competitors? Those aren't hard decisions, Thatcher. They're crimes." Thatcher's companion, a brawny man I didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably beside the SUV. "Thatch, maybe we should go, before the cops show." But Thatcher seemed unable to stop himself now, his careful facade crumbling under the pressure of exposure. "You have no idea what it's been like," he hissed at Larkin. "Living in the shadow of St. Sterling, never measuring up, never being good enough for his precious daughter or his self-righteous widow." He gestured dismissively toward me. "Do you think I didn't notice the judgment in her eyes every time I made a decision she wouldn't have made? The way she poisoned you against me bit by bit?" "My mother never said a word against you," Larkin replied, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her hands. "She respected my choices, even when she disagreed. That's more than you ever did." In the distance, I heard the wail of approaching sirens. Thatcher heard them too, his expression shifting from rage to calculation in an instant. "This isn't over," he said, his voice regaining its smooth, controlled quality. "When the truth comes out about how your family conspired against me, about how you've mismanaged the company for years while I covered for you, you'll regret this little power play." He turned to his companion. "Let's go." "The chess set," Larkin insisted, not backing down. For a moment I thought Thatcher would refuse, but then, with deliberate slowness, he opened the rear hatch of the SUV and removed the velvet bag containing Sterling's antique chess pieces. Instead of handing it to Larkin, he let it drop to the snow-covered driveway with casual disdain. "Take it," he said. "It's just the beginning of what you'll lose before this is over." As police cruisers rounded the corner, lights flashing across the snow-laden landscape, Thatcher and his companion climbed into the SUV and drove away, leaving Larkin standing in the driveway, clutching her father's chess set to her chest like a shield. The officers took statements from all 3 of us, documenting what Thatcher had taken and promising to follow up. But we all knew the chess set was likely the only item we'd recover. Whatever else he'd packed into that SUV, family photos, heirlooms, personal papers, was gone. Another piece of Larkin's life excised by the man she'd trusted with everything. As we drove back to my house in silence, I watched Larkin in the rearview mirror, her face illuminated by passing streetlights, her expression unreadable as she cradled the velvet bag on her lap. In that moment, she looked both younger and older than her years, wounded by betrayal but hardened by it too, changed in ways that were still unfolding. The reporter was still camped outside my house when we returned, joined now by two more from competing networks. They surged forward as we approached the door, shouting questions about Thatcher's allegations and the company's future. Larkin paused on the porch steps, turning to face them with unexpected composure. "I have one statement," she said, her voice clear in the quiet night. "Kavanaugh Technologies was founded on principles of integrity, innovation, and service. Those values remain unchanged. We will emerge from this stronger than before." She drew a deep breath. "As for Mr. Frost's allegations, I'll let his actions speak for themselves. Good night." With that, she walked into the house, head high, still clutching her father's chess set. Dash and I followed, exchanging a look of cautious optimism. The Larkin who had confronted Thatcher tonight, who had addressed the reporters with such clarity and conviction, was not the same woman who had collapsed in tears just 24 hours earlier. She was finding her strength, reclaiming her voice. The road ahead would be difficult. Legal battles, media scrutiny, rebuilding a company, reconstructing a life. But watching her set the chess set carefully on the mantel above the fireplace, I felt a surge of fierce pride. Thatcher had tried to diminish her, to steal her confidence along with her company. But in the end, he had unwittingly given her back something precious: the knowledge of her own resilience, the rediscovery of her own worth. And that was something he could never take away again. 6 months passed like a season of rebirth and reinvention. The snow melted, crocuses pushed through the softening earth, and Burlington transformed from a winter fortress into a vibrant spring landscape. As the world around us renewed itself, so did Larkin. I watched with quiet pride as my daughter reclaimed her life, piece by piece, day by day. The initial media frenzy had subsided, replaced by business publications lauding her leadership during crisis. Kavanaugh Technologies not only survived the scandal, but emerged stronger, with Larkin at the helm implementing her father's original vision while adding her own innovative touches. Thatcher's legal challenges had proven as empty as his promises. The evidence against him was too substantial, his financial crimes too well documented. When faced with the possibility of federal prison time, he accepted a plea deal that required full restitution of the stolen funds and a ban from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. Sable Lockhart had quickly abandoned him when the tide turned, cutting her own deal with prosecutors in exchange for testimony. Last we heard, Thatcher had relocated to Arizona, attempting to rebuild his career with a startup medical supply company. The business community in Burlington had closed ranks against him, his charm and connections rendered worthless by his exposed dishonesty. This morning, I sat on the porch of my Victorian home, enjoying the early summer warmth and waiting for Larkin to arrive. She had moved into her own place 3 months ago, not back to the cold modernist house she'd shared with Thatcher, but to a charming craftsman bungalow near the lake, where sunlight streamed through stained glass windows and gardens bloomed with her newly discovered passion for horticulture. Bertie joined me for coffee, her presence a comfortable constant through all the turmoil. "Have you seen the latest profile of Larkin in Business Weekly?" she asked, passing me her tablet. "They're calling her the Phoenix of medical tech, rising from the ashes of corporate scandal to lead with transparency and innovation." I smiled as I scanned the article, which praised Larkin's new company initiatives, including an affordable insulin delivery system that had already attracted attention from healthcare advocates nationwide. "Sterling would be bursting with pride," I said, returning the tablet, "not just about the business success, but about who she's become through all this." Bertie nodded, her eyes wise. "And what about you, Winnie? How are you feeling about your role in all this? You're barely mentioned in these articles, despite being the one who first uncovered Thatcher's betrayal." I sipped my coffee, considering the question. "That's as it should be. This is Larkin's story now, her triumph. I'm content to be the supporting character." "The unsung hero," Bertie corrected with a smile. The sound of tires on gravel announced Larkin's arrival. She emerged from her car looking nothing like the broken woman of 6 months ago. dressed in a tailored blue suit that emphasized her confidence rather than conforming to Thatcher's preferred demure style. Her hair cut in a practical bob that framed her face. She radiated the quiet authority that had always been her birthright. "Sorry I'm late," she called, climbing the porch steps with a spring in her step. "Board meeting ran long. We just approved the funding for the Pediatric Medical Device Division." She bent to kiss my cheek before settling into the wicker chair beside me. Dad's dream project, finally happening. Pride swelled in my chest. Sterling had always wanted to develop affordable medical devices specifically designed for children with chronic conditions. But the profit margins hadn't been attractive enough for Thatcher's vision of the company. "He would be so proud," I said, echoing my earlier thought to Bertie. "Of both of you," Bertie added, raising her coffee mug in a toast. Larkin's smile held a hint of the sadness that still occasionally shadowed her eyes. "I just wish I'd seen through Thatcher sooner. All those years wasted, all that energy spent trying to please someone who never actually cared about me." "Not wasted," I corrected gently. "You learned, you grew, you built skills and knowledge that serve you now. Nothing that makes us stronger is ever truly wasted." She nodded, accepting the wisdom, if not fully believing it yet. Time would help with that, I knew. Time and her own successes, built on her terms. "Dash called this morning," she said, changing the subject. "He's thinking of moving back to Burlington permanently. Says he misses the family connection, and there's certainly enough cybersecurity work to keep him busy between consulting for Kavanaugh Technologies and other local firms." "That would be wonderful," I said, trying to contain my delight at the prospect of having both my children nearby again. "Your brother has seemed happier these past months, more engaged." "We all have," Larkin observed. "It's like we were under a spell for 10 years, living in Thatcher's carefully constructed reality. Now we're awake again, reconnected." The three of us sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the birds in the maple trees and feeling the gentle summer breeze. Then Larkin straightened, a familiar determination crossing her face. "I have news," she announced. "I wasn't going to say anything until it was finalized, but I've been seeing someone." I worked to keep my expression neutral, though surprise and concern flickered through me. It seemed so soon after the devastation of her marriage. Sensing my reaction, Larkin laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound I hadn't heard in years. "Not romantically, Mom. Professionally. I've been seeing a therapist who specializes in recovery from manipulative relationships." Relief and pride washed through me. "That's wonderful, darling." "It's been enlightening," she continued. "Understanding the patterns, how someone like Thatcher operates, how I was vulnerable to his manipulation. I'm learning to trust my instincts again, to recognize red flags." She looked out at the garden, her expression reflective. "The therapist says I shouldn't rush into dating again, that I need time to rediscover who I am without someone else's influence. She's right, of course." "There's no hurry," I agreed. "You have plenty of time." Larkin turned back to me, reaching over to take my hand. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did, Mom. How you saw what was happening when I couldn't. How you gathered evidence, brought in Dash, orchestrated that public revelation." A smile tugged at her lips. "It was kind of badass, you know." I laughed, surprised by her language and the admiration in her voice. "I was just protecting my daughter, the way any mother would." "No," she shook her head firmly. "Not every mother would have been so strategic, so patient, so effective. You could have just told me what you saw, but you knew I wouldn't believe it without irrefutable proof. You understood exactly what was needed." She squeezed my hand. "You saw me clearly even when I couldn't see myself." Emotion tightened my throat. For so many years I had felt increasingly invisible. To society because of my age, to Larkin because of Thatcher's influence. To be seen and appreciated now meant more than I could express. "That's what mothers do," I said simply. "We see our children, even when the rest of the world misses what makes them extraordinary." Bertie, sensing the emotional current between us, discreetly excused herself to refresh our coffee, leaving Larkin and me alone on the porch. "I've been thinking about what's next," Larkin said after a moment. "About legacy, about what really matters." She looked at me intently. "I want you to come back to Kavanaugh Technologies, Mom. Not just as my mother, but as an advisor. You understood Dad's vision better than anyone. You have wisdom and perspective that we need. The offer caught me off guard. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your leadership. It's not intrusion, it's collaboration, she insisted. The kind of partnership I should have had with Thatcher, but never did. One based on mutual respect and shared values. Her eyes, so like Sterling's, held mine steadily. What do you say? Looking at my daughter, strong, resilient, finally coming into her full power, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. Sterling's legacy lived on not just in the company that bore our name, but in the daughter who embodied his integrity and vision, and in the son who shared his analytical brilliance. And perhaps there was still a role for me to play, not as the invisible aging mother-in-law, but as a valued voice of experience and wisdom. I'd be honored, I said, squeezing her hand in return. As Bertie returned with fresh coffee, Larkin raised her mug in a toast. To new beginnings, to family, to finally seeing clearly. To truth, I added, echoing my toast from that fateful night 6 months ago. The foundation of everything that matters. The summer breeze stirred the maple leaves above us, dappling the porch with shifting patterns of light and shadow. In that peaceful moment, I realized that Thatcher's betrayal, painful as it had been, had ultimately given us a precious gift, the chance to rebuild not just a company, but a family, stronger and more authentic than before. Some wounds leave scars, but they also leave wisdom. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, being underestimated is indeed a superpower, especially for a woman who refuses to become invisible, no matter her age. If you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. I never thought I'd be exposing my son-in-law at 68, but life has a way of surprising us. Subscribe to hear more stories of women reclaiming their power, and leave a comment if my story resonated with you. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for the truth, even when no one expects you to be the one who does it.